Welcome to the latest E+T Off the Page podcast, where we'll delve into the world of electric vehicles and specifically the issue of whether we have the materials needed to build the new fleet that could replace internal combustion engines. I'm Tim Fryer, and in the studio with me is my colleague Jack Loughran, and our expert today is Lewis Piper, who's Professor of Electrochemical Materials at Warwick Manufacturing Group at the University of Warwick. Hello, Lewis.
Hello.
Now, in the next and in fact, the last issues of E+T, we've got a number of articles about materials. Well, not strictly on the topic we're going to talk about today. I thought an interesting tangent that we could fly off on for this podcast would be materials for the new electrically driven age. So maybe the best way of framing the conversation is that, are we assuming that the most sustainable method of personalised transport for the future is the electric car?
That's a great question. Thank you very much for inviting me today. I'd say in the near future, that certainly looks to be the case. If we look at what we're seeing in terms of statistics with adoption of electric vehicles, we've got 1.6 million of those cars today driving around in the UK, which is about 5%. But if you look back only a few years ago, there were about 1% of new cars in 2019 were electric vehicles. Now they're 17% or higher. So if you view that we've got large infrastructure with regards to roads, and a lot of people already have cars, in the near future, electric vehicles do seem to be the way forward, and looking to be fully electric by 2035. And we're about above 20% now in 2024. So we're on track with that to reach our net zero targets in terms of more sustainable personal transport.
Well, it's probably worth pointing out that 2035 is a date that they're going to stop selling new petrol cars. But I mean, we'll still have presumably secondhand sales after that. And so I think the petrol car's still got a good few decades left in it, like before you really don't see any on the roads. But at the moment, 2035 is the date.
Yeah, to phase out, exactly as you say. So I guess there'll always be petrol heads with certain types of cars, and also racers, and also collectible cars, vintage cars.
I mean, the government did recently relax targets around that 2035 date, actually, because there's going to be, I think they were going to ban hybrids by 2030.
They brought it forward to 2030 and then they put it back to 2035 again, didn't they?
Right, yeah. So I suppose that leads to the obvious question is, while adoption might be increasing rather rapidly, why isn't it increasing as fast as we need it to?
Oh, yeah. No, I would say that we're seeing, initially it was a lot of concerns with cost and range anxiety, and really we've been benefiting from huge developments in scale of battery production, improvements in the performance of battery, reductions of cost. I mean, from 2008 to 2023, we've had about 90% reduction in cost. So you've basically gained better larger packs at lower costs. So the cost of electric vehicles has continued to plummet down, and you're getting close to parity now with ICE, or you could argue you're well on parity with that. I think the adoption of cars is, a lot of people it's not like you're buying a car willy-nilly. It's usually for a purpose. You've got to replace a car, or you're looking to get a car because your circumstances have changed. So it's going to be a slower adoption anyway. I think one of the ones that I always point to is cost has always been a factor, but you've got things like salary sacrifice systems, which are really big incentives. The other component is the range of the car. Well, the packs are getting larger for the lower cost. And then the final one is charge confidence. Do you feel comfortable that you're going to be able to charge up your car when you want to charge up your car? And for a lot of people that don't have driveways at home, this is a big issue with whether you're going to buy a car. And a lot of people are kind of looking at, is that the solution for me next time I go around to buy a car? And anything the government can do to sort of incentivize that in terms of charging stations, because I think we need a variety of them. There's the slow chargers that you would have, say, at your home, and then there's the rapid chargers that you want on the road. I think that's the biggest area that you could really get more adoption with, is incentives like salary sacrifice scheme, but more importantly, ways in which people feel that they could charge their cars more readily. And it's kind of mad that you can charge a car at home. You don't have a petrol pump at home.
And we look at the heart of an EV is the battery, really, isn't it? That's what defines the range, recharge times, acceleration, lifespan, all the things that define the performance of that car. Now, the vast majority of these batteries are based on a lithium-ion chemistry, although I'm aware that there's variations in the internal chemistry of them, particularly around the cathodes, which is work that you've done on, isn't it, in your research? But maybe you could comment on where you think we are in the development of the lithium-ion battery. And is the lithium-ion battery the only realistic mass market technology going forward?
That's a great question. I definitely think it's the key driver at the moment. And I do think we've gone from a situation of could we hit certain performance metrics with electric cars to can we continue to drive the cost down? We've kind of gone from performance considerations more to cost with lithium-ion battery technology. One of the things I would say with lithium-ion battery is we are kind of using three types of chemistry. On the cathode, there's two types. It's going with layered oxides, which go back to the original lithium cobalt oxide, and we've just been replacing out cobalt for other materials and engineering those materials more. You got lithium iron phosphate, where again you're modifying the materials and you're changing the composition by now adding manganese. And then the final one is graphite dominates on the anode. So you could view it as we are basically, this is something which we're projecting in the future to still be massive going forward. So in 20, I'd have to double check, but I think it's something in the region of by 2035, we'll be producing like 7 terawatt hours of production a year on batteries. 6 of that will be using one of the layered oxides, one of the LFPs, or a blend of them.
So can I ask, where are those numbers coming from? Is that what we're projected that we'll need, or is that projected what we're going to manufacture? Because that comes down to the core of it, is where are these materials going to come from?
So that quote comes more from the McKinsey report on sort of projections of the demand, and also discussing with the car manufacturers where they are going to likely use going forward, because car manufacturers work in something in the region of 7 to 8 years with regards to model development and implementation. So the plans for 2035 are already factoring in quite a lot of what are they doing now and projecting with the chemistry. So you do see reports on things like solid state batteries, which are viewed as different to lithium ion batteries. And in those cases, what the big difference is, you're moving away from a liquid electrolyte to a solid electrolyte. And the reason why you want to do that is you want to, essentially what I refer to as kind of back to the future. The first ever lithium ion batteries were called lithium metal batteries because they use lithium metal, but they were recalled for safety reasons. We want to go back to lithium metal because that's a really high energy density material.
Are they the ones that burst into flames in airplanes?
These were the ones that were massively recalled, in the early 80s. I think they were the first adopters. And the whole idea with solid state batteries is using that sort of solid state electrolyte is one of the ways in which people feel that we can move back to those higher energy performance of lithium metal. And I always remember like a great thing with Sony when they introduced the camcorder lithium ion batteries with graphite. They deliberately called them lithium ion batteries to avoid any implications of being seen as lithium metal. But going forward, if we want to sort of reach higher energy density targets, we will want to go back to either using lithium metal or thin layers of silicon. So that's kind of the next generation of battery types like solid state. They're being touted as ones that car companies will adopt going forward, although we're not seeing that adoption as quick as we thought.
So just two questions here. Firstly, just personal interest. These lithium metal batteries from the early 80s, like, did they have energy densities that were higher than today's lithium ion batteries?
So they used a different cathode originally. So they used sort of titanium disulfide or moly disulfide. So they had a lower voltage.
Mm-hmm.
But and they were actually made as sort of large format cells with the view for electric vehicles, because at that time there wasn't laptops. It wasn't viewed for portable electronics. It was more viewed for cars. In that case, they were of the order of 400 watt hours per kilogram as a cell. That is high, seeing that the targets we want to achieve for aerospace and stuff are like the upper targets that we were looking for were like 500 watt hours per kilogram. That's where with today's cathodes, you would still have to go back to using lithium metal. So they were impressive.
And so the only downsides of those is effectively that they're incredibly dangerous. But but the positives, the kind of technical specifications are impressive, even though you're going back 40 years in terms of technology.
Yeah, the original idea is really sound. It is, the safety has always been the thing with the development of batteries. It's because the implication is you want to have warranty with these cells. And so that is where safety becomes, cost and safety really are anchors with performance. I always laugh with regards to safety and implications with batteries in isolation a little bit. That's poor phrasing. But essentially, a big rock is dangerous if you don't use it sensibly. If you put it straight over the top of your head, that's dangerous. Driving around in a big, in something where you got a big barrel of gasoline underneath you, that's quite dangerous. It would be interesting if we could sort of develop petrol cars in current climate.
I suppose just going back a little bit, kind of in recent history, if you're talking about a lithium-ion battery that goes into an electric car made in 2025, is it any different to that battery that was placed into a car in 2020? And what I'm saying is, in the last 5 years or possibly 10 years, is the technology still improving, or have we slightly hit a roadblock and actually we need to switch to entirely new chemistries in order to get genuine performance improvements?
Oh, I would say there's been improvements on the chemistry side. There's been improvements on the manufacturing side. There's improvements on the packaging, the welding, the operation of the cells, the protocols that are used, the battery management system. All of these things we benefit from. And I think that's mainly because as you go to higher scales, you have kind of like this learning curve effect, which does mean that you reduce cost, but whilst you're improving performance. So we have seen improvements in chemistry. So when in the Faraday degradation project, it was started off in 2018, and that was kind of we're going to be future proofing. We're going to look at 80% nickel, NMC 811. And the view was, people are using 622, 60%. And it was like, well, they'll probably not adopt that because it'll be harder to implement. There's more costs.
And the reason we want nickel is because it's more readily available and cheaper. Is that right? Is that why we want to
increase it? It's not cheaper in that sense. So I should step back a second. So this is talking about state-of-the-art batteries that you would have for electric vehicles. You would have graphite or graphite silicon on one side for your anode, and then you would have a layered oxide on the other side for your cathode or your positive electrode. And essentially, you would kind of use the chemistry a layered oxide, which is basically similar to lithium cobalt oxide, but what you're doing is replacing the cobalt with various amounts of nickel or manganese or aluminium, etc., to sort of remove how much cobalt you got. Now, cobalt by itself, scientifically, is really good. It's very good at keeping the lithium in the right place. It gives you a good voltage. But the issue with it was twofold. One, for the same voltage, you can only pull out reversibly a certain percentage with the LCO reliably. And so the idea was, if we cap at the same voltage, if I put in more nickel for cobalt, I can pull more accessible lithium for the same voltage. So I can increase my capacity for the same voltage. And the other thing is ethical considerations where that cobalt's coming from has driven the view of, can we reduce our reliance on cobalt? Recycling opens up another issue where if we pull back a lot of cobalt now from the recycle side, that ethical question goes. So there's a bit of a balance, but the general rule over the years has been going from everything being purely lithium cobalt oxide, then the emergence of NMC, where you got different ratios of nickel, manganese, aluminium in your cobalt. So NMCs refer to the nickel, manganese, cobalt, we changed that ratio, and the general trend has been to increase with nickel content. So 5 years ago, we were kind of saying, well, 60's established. Will we be moving to 80? Now today it's more, are we moving to 90? And on the other side, we kind of viewed it about 4 years ago, or 4 to 5 years ago, that lithium iron phosphate, or LFP, that had kind of, because you got a lower cell chemistry that you can obtain compared to the NMCs as you go to higher nickel content, the view was LFP will die. But what we've seen is a renaissance of LFP. In fact, we see big improvements with performance in cells with LFP.
And Tesla and BYD and other manufacturers have adopted that, haven't they?
Yes, there's improvements of the actual materials they're using, the ways in which they're making the electrodes. But the key bit is their view, what you can do is view it like this. In LFP, you can pull out 100% of your lithium back and forth reversibly. In the NMCs, you pull out something between 50% to 2/3 of your lithium. And you don't want to pull too much out because it's more unstable, the NMC, and there's more safety considerations with regards to the NMC. So at the cell level, your NMC has a higher capacity, more energy density. But if you can make a larger cell, or when you go to pack, because it's safer, you remove more packaging, i.e. dead weight, dead mass, dead volume, then at the pack level, which is what the car manufacturers really care about, you've got better energy density. And that's really where the LFP has taken on, because, you go from a case of having larger, fewer cells, and that's easier to manage if you're doing your pack management. You've got fewer cells. That means you don't have to worry about so many considerations of your individual cells for your battery management system. You've got less dead weight. So that means you've improved massively on cost and energy density.
Okay. Can I jump backwards, if you like, to a really basic question, and then I want to ask you about those chemistries again, if I may. The basic question is that in an EV battery, you've got a cathode, an anode, electrolyte.
Yep.
And then there is about how the whole system is managed, how the cells work together, and efficiency of the system. Is it a case of tweaking every individual part of that, or will certain cathodes, anodes, and electrolytes only work together in a certain way, or can you tweak one element of it and improve the quality of the battery?
Oh yeah, that's a great question. So what you've got fundamentally is your anode and cathode are doing two sort of reactions. They're basically doing bulk catalysis. They're breaking and forming bonds to store and release energy, and you like to have them spatially separated. So the idea of the separator is to ensure that they don't short, because if they're just next to each other, you wouldn't have the reaction. The thing is, you have to have those two reactions in concert, spatially separated. So that's why you have things like the separator, and the electrolyte allows you to kind of have it so then those two bulk catalytic reactions are essentially spatially separated. So then electrons only go externally, and lithium ions go back and forth between them. So that's the first thing. So the second bit is you want the overall cell will be a result of that concert. So say you've got a really great storage material for your anode, where you get really high capacity. What happens is, if you've got a cathode which is, say, only a third of that capacity, it's not going to help you, because that cathode now becomes your limiting part. You have to adjust your mass of your cathode part to balance it.
So you need to tune a system, basically.
You have to tune the system. So you have to tune the system from a charge mass ratio. We generally try to be close to parity, but we usually have a little safety concern. So we have a bit more excess anode material. So we have what we call an N to P ratio. That means positive and negative electrode ratio of about 1.1-ish. They vary between that. And then so that's the first part. Then the other one is, as you pull out charge from each of them, their voltage profile with respect to, say, the lithium redox will be something else to balance. So your overall voltage profile you're going to have is going to be essentially your cathode voltage minus your anode voltage. So if you have a material which has got, you want to maximize your voltage window of your cell, because that combination of capacity times your voltage is your energy density you care about. So if you have the same capacity, you increase your voltage, you gain. And this is what people have been doing with going from lithium iron phosphate, doping it with manganese to make LMFP, has the same capacity, but you increase the voltage. So you gain.
So this is was the question I was going to go on to, is what the essential elements, if we start with the cathodes, lithium, manganese, cobalt, nickel. Why those four, and do you look at bringing in other elements that could change the way that it performs, and what do each of those things actually bring to the system?
Oh, that's a great question. So we like graphite. That's for the anode. So in that case, we like graphite because it's a material where you've already got like a layered structure in which lithium can kind of go in, and it likes to go in stages. So some lithium goes in one layer, some lithium goes into another layer, and they like to stage. So we like that because the lithium stage is in there and it has a low voltage, close to what you'd have if it was lithium metal. So as a physicist, I kind of don't remember the periodic table as well as a chemist offhand. They memorize the periodic.
But you know the important ones, don't you?
I usually look at in terms of where the orbitals are. So you go to a 1s orbital, 2p orbital, if you remember chemistry. But when you look at the periodic table, there's a big long row at the top. That's your 3D metals. That's where your iron, your manganese and stuff are. Now we like those metals mixed with oxygen because they have a property where they're good for having flexibility with electron. So when we're in the battery, all we're doing is we're releasing a lithium ion. And for charge compensation, what we really care about is releasing that electron. So we want materials that are able to feel quite comfortable giving away electron and receiving electron. And those 3D metal oxides like iron, manganese, nickel, they're very good at that with oxygen. So the layered oxides are basically like the graphite, they're layered. So lithium are like in nice layers. They have a voltage which is high, something like 4 volts versus where the graphite kind of is. And then the other component is they have really nice way in which as you pull out the lithium ion and you pull out electron, those transition metals, iron, nickel, manganese, they're very good at accommodating that change of electron count without the material falling apart. And that's key why we have like thousands of cycles of these materials going back and forth, is partly to do with that ability fundamentally of that chemistry to accommodate changing the electron density in a facile way.
So if they'll do the same thing, why do you need manganese and iron and nickel?
So obviously, all physicists think in terms of spherical cows. That's the joke. How do you fill up a field? It's a really poor joke, but it's still a joke nonetheless, where a physicist would say, let's assume all the cows are spheres. So to a first approximation, those elements are very similar, but the devil's in the details. So there are differences in terms of how, when you combine them together as a composition, there's certain configurations where they are more stable, or they have the tendency to do the right properties that you're looking for in terms of accommodating electrons, right voltages. And this is kind of linked to things called oxidation states. So it's kind of like when the transition metal sort of meets with the oxygen, how many of electrons are donated to the oxygen to facilitate the bonds.
So how much longer do you think like lithium-ion technology has in terms of how much further can we push that technology before we need to switch to an entirely new battery chemistry? Or is that not even, can you actually just continue making lithium batteries more and more efficient?
So yeah, that's a really great question. I think there are views that we kind of know where the limits of sort of energy densities we can achieve with lithium-ion batteries. So if we use graphite, we cap out about 350 watt-hours per kilogram. If we want to do 500 watt-hours per kilogram, we do need to have like lithium, and we do have to play with the cell design, optimized dead weight. We people are achieving this now, but to go beyond that, we would probably have to tap into other chemistries where we have different reactions.
So could you give a rough date as to when we might hit that point where we've really kind of maxed out what we can do with the lithium ion before we have to seriously consider switching batteries over to something
Well,
different?
So what I would say is lithium sulfur batteries are one example where you can achieve higher energy densities. But the lithium sulfur cell was actually developed before the lithium metal battery I mentioned.
Mm.
So it's all about how well you can perform with lifetime, safety, warranty, and cost. So with all of this, there's lots of chemistries that have been touted, conversion reactions instead of what lithium-ion batteries do, which is called intercalation or alloy and de-oiling for other things. So there's other reactions that can go on, but it's really that driver of not just can you achieve those capacities, but can you maintain them? And can you do it safely? And can you do it at cost points that mean people will adopt it? And that is where lithium-ion battery technology is really strong at the moment. And that's why you're seeing huge developments with lithium iron phosphate, which is viewed as an old chemistry. It's had a bit of a renaissance. But now you're talking about, instead of like your cylindrical cells, like you'd have in your laptop, which is like 5 amp hours, you're getting cells which are like 300, 400, 500 amp hours. And you're getting cells that previously were like 1,000 cycles. They're now, 12,000 cycles, and they're getting cheaper per unit of energy production. So
the immediate future we're looking at is a continuation of the development of lithium-ion variations.
I think so. And I think it'll be an enabler for the other technologies as well. So a lot of these things are, all of the electrochemical devices, if you consider like a fuel cell or a battery, there's still sandwiches. They're still assembled as kind of very similar manufacturing steps with the assembly. There's lots of related technologies or science or engineering that can be adopted to help. So for instance, the way in which we're moving towards dry processing to reduce costs with manufacturing. So at the moment it's like Great British Bake Off. You mix your anode and cathode material in a slurry which is wet, like you're in a big mixing pot like you'd see on Bake Off. You cast it and then you roller pin it after it's dried. That drying stage is wasted energy. We know that if we want to sort of improve the cost further, we get rid of that we move towards more dry processing. People are starting to use that for technologies with the anode, but we want to do it all the way through. That helps with regards to solid state battery technology requirements as well. So some things we're doing right now that lithium-ion battery is doing really well will probably benefit things like solid state battery, lithium sulfur battery technology, etc.
Well, since you mentioned solid state, I mean, let's talk about that a little bit. A solid state battery is the next obvious kind of future battery, or is there another competing chemistry which has more benefits?
So sodium ion is probably the one that's already here. That's viewed as a lot of people would liken to the fact that, well, there's lots of sodium chloride based salt in the world. It must be a lot cheaper. That would probably mean that we could make cheaper cells, and that would be a very strong counterpart. They are doing large production of sodium ion batteries. What I'd say with sodium ion is, because you're doing very similar manufacturing steps, and also you're interested in certain grades of materials, not just table salt, the cost differences are not as large as you would expect. And in fact, the way in which they're driving down the cost with these large format LFP cells are kind of having a point where LFP graphite cells are kind of like your cheapest option now. And so you kind of got a situation where sodium ion until recently had a really great boom. Then LFP has kind of smothered it, but that technology still exists. And I see a future where we're needing to diversify more and more. Is sodium ion is less mature than the lithium-ion battery technology. It will benefit from things from the lithium-ion battery. It will benefit from the fact that people want batteries, and more batteries. There'll be more markets that open. There'll be more diversity associated with demand, but also from the supply chain. A lot of need to diversify the supply chain means that we're in a situation where it's great to see technologies like sodium-ion blossom the way they have. I still expect a bright future for them. If we're talking about percentage shares, it might be lower than what people expect, but it's going to be a bigger pie overall. And I think all of the progress that's been done with developing lithium-ion batteries is cascading to helping sodium-ion, solid state, lithium sulfur, etc., which, will have to have their own benefits of meeting what people want as a warranty cell at the end of the day for a certain cost point and application.
Okay. What about the availability of the materials that we're talking about here? Now, if we go down the LFP batteries, for example, there is no cobalt in them at all, is there? Is that right?
That's correct, yeah. So they're
And that-
cobalt free.
And that's one of the biggest contentious issues, isn't it? But do we have enough lithium, manganese, nickel, whatever other elements go in there?
So one of the things I often see, and it is usually showing sort of mineral abundance reports, say like we've got this much material on the Earth's crust. What I'd say is it really depends on the infrastructure and supply chains with the different ores and precursors you want. I remember going to Bolivia. The Salar de Uyuni is the largest salar in the world. I did speak to a US geologist on that same trip, and I said, how important is this? And bear in mind, it's largely untapped, and the Bolivian government have been working hard to sort of try to exploit it, but essentially it's not the main source of lithium in the world. In fact, it's not commercialized like that. If we only had one source of lithium in the world, that would be enough for all the critical mineral reports, expectations for gigafactory and stuff. There is a lot of abundance. I think it comes down to how well and sustainable the mining and manufacturing methods are. So when I was in Chile, there's a lot of consideration now with mining is viewed as very important, is a key component of their economy. They're very keen on the copper. There's 10 times as much copper in a battery pack than there is lithium. But the view there is, and it's a lot more intensive mining than compared to the evaporation ponds with lithium. But the view is, what they're looking for is not to stop mining, but essentially, how can we engage better with the indigenous communities? How do we do this in a sustainable way? How do we increase the value chain of our products going out to benefit us? Sustainable practices. And at this point, I wouldn't mind highlighting the great work the UK's British Geological Survey are doing in those sort of regions, because they work very well in both the highly respected work they do in those areas to help determine what our critical mineral reports are, in order to feed into government projections of what we need in terms of different sectors, not just batteries, but also rare earths, graphite, etc.
But I mean, like the way you talk about, if we had a productive enough mine that would meet the world's needs lithium, right? But that sort of is under the assumption that we live in a world of kind of perfect free trade where kind of minerals and so on pass between international borders just purely based on demand and need and resources and so on and so forth. Clearly, especially since the second Trump administration, there's lots of walls going up with regards to tariffs and so on and so forth. Geopolitical tensions are pretty high at the moment. I think that's fair to say. I mean, China in April restricted their rare earth exports for political reasons, and actually that's something that hasn't been resolved yet. So is there a need for the West to stop relying on, countries like China or even ones in South America for their lithium supply?
Maybe not with lithium, because we've agreed we're dependent on that for our batteries for the foreseeable. But within an EV, there's all the motors which require all the rare earths as well, which is really the sharp end of what you're talking about, Jack, isn't it? With China owning so much of the resources there. But does that become a geopolitical issue, or does it become a technical issue that we need to do better at designing alternatives?
Yeah, I think there's definitely a policy of the world is changing from, full-blown globalization, policy that was really exposed during COVID with regards to where could we get like the PPE from, the view that manufacturing should be local as well, how that links to sustainability. I think you've touched upon some critical, this is why we call them like the critical minerals report. These are ones where we kind of know that we're vulnerable with the supply chain. I mean, China's done a fantastic job of essentially locking up the lithium-ion battery supply chain. All of the graphite is Chinese pretty much. And that's where we do need to do things to work with legacy graphite companies in the UK to help them develop their material solutions that could be used. But we also have to be mindful of the fact that some of these things require large infrastructure support. I mean, a graphite furnace, graphitization furnace, they go very hot for a long period of time. They are very energy extensive. So we also have to have ways in which we have cheaper energy cost production with all of these things. It's not just getting the minerals and the supply chain, it's also making sure that we have the ability to produce things at the same time. I think with rare earths, I would point to the phrase rare earths is suggest that they're rare is more to do with the fact that they are quite abundant as a percentage of the Earth's crust. It's more to do with the fact that they're low concentrations in ores, and there's very few places in the world where they're localized enough that it makes sense for mining, and that's where China is having that role. They're critically important for producing very strong fields. So like how we like the chemistry of transition metal oxides, for instance, we like the chemistry of rare earth alloys because they have lots of 4F electrons, if people remember their chemistry, but essentially these are ones which don't produce really strong magnetic fields. That's the key bit. So their chemistry is, if you want a strong magnetic field and you want that for a very powerful motor, that chemistry does give you the best permanent magnet option. We should explore other options with that, but those strong magnetic fields are also why you get really good efficient electric motors, which is why your electric cars are actually more efficient with the actual energy they use as a result. So supply chain is really critical for essential, sovereign national security. And this is where I think over the last 5 years has really been sort of viewed upon that. We had Biden's administration with the IRA. So that's not even just sort of the Trump side of things. There's a recognition.
Inflation Reduction Act.
That's right. Sorry. The IRA
Yeah.
associated with a policy in the US. And that was really one of bringing back the manufacturing capability and supply chain in tandem together. And I think that's what you have to do, because if you get the minerals, you still have to worry about what you're going to do with them, and it's all linked together. But yeah, graphite is one that we are concerned about. Lithium is another one in terms of the fact that it's not just this. A lot of UK investment companies support all the mining operations, but the licenses of exploiting the lithium that's extracted go straight through China. So it's also kind of like increasing roles in the value chain. And realizing that some of these are not just purely economic considerations.
So do you have any idea how long it would take? I mean, America, like in theory, that there are deposits of rare earths in the US. They just don't exploit them because of all the issues you just outlined. Do you have any idea how long it would take for the US to kind of develop its own truly robust supply chain for these that would mean it's not reliant on countries like China?
On which part? Do you mean like the semiconductors where they're relying on Taiwan? Do you mean
I mean on
batteries?
Extracting all the minerals needed to make modern batteries.
Does that involve delving into places like Antarctica and Greenland?
So I think there's always reports of them accessing more, say, lithium sites. I mean, a lot of the salt flats are areas which have already been exploited in the US for lithium. They're exploited in the 50s, so they are scorched earth policy. They are dead like the moon. So the other thing is...
Well, what do you mean? The mines are just unusable, is that?
Yeah, so the places where they were extracting lithium in the US are ecologically dead.
Right.
In those parts. So the other component with this is, are they going to do this in a way in which they do it sustainably which increases cost, but probably that cost depends on your viewpoint in time.
So it permanently scars the landscape in a way that is
Well, that's what they did at that point.
irrecoverable. Right. So there are more sustainable methods these days.
In fact, things have been pushed with so even things which are, I think, relatively benign, which are the evaporation ponds, because of concerns of water consumption, people are also looking towards direct lithium extraction, where you basically use electrochemical methods or membrane technology to extract out the lithium. And in fact, we're using those sort of approaches with sort of deposits in Cornwall and others in the country where we do have lithium brine availability at lower concentrations. But with all of this, I do think this does lead to, is there a preferred chemistry for your battery production that means that it might not hit the right performance but meets your resilience? Can you do, and that's kind of very an isolationist view. I also think it's important to have key international partnerships built on trust, and that's also with those regions. So the UK's been doing a lot with Latin American companies with what's known as a lithium triangle, so Argentina, Chile, and Bolivia, with regards to essentially trust exercise to build those long-term relationships to ensure that you don't have to compromise on what choices you want to have.
Can I ask, because you have been involved directly in developing some of the cathode chemistries, haven't you, within your work? Do you approach that by thinking, I don't want cobalt involved, for example, or we want to minimize the amount, well, not nickel, there's plenty of that around, but manganese perhaps? Set the parameters of what's available first. Are you looking at trying to create the most optimal battery unit?
So I think in the battery field, so I've worked in various material fields and device fields, and the battery one is definitely one which has caught lots of attention. And so even fundamental research is shaped by industry pull with regards to targets. I think the approach is you can't be completely in isolation of either. So targets are important, but you also have to recognize the need to understand what the fundamentals are in terms of, is it possible to fundamentally reach those targets? Like, is it possible to sort of get 1,000 watt hour per kilogram battery on these chemistries? And, if it's a case where people are presenting in isolation saying, yes, they can do that, you can show pen and paper equations to show physically not possible, or you need this sort of approach. I think there's been an approach with developing cathode materials, which are two main separate ones. And there is a one of taking materials that we already know, where we have a certain target where we want to go to a higher target. And we know that essentially what we have to do is there's modification of the material itself. That could be the particle shape, size distribution, chemistry, like playing with dopants, additives, protective layers, what I would call as active material engineering to push it further. And that'll be linked with fundamentals. We know the ultimate limit of this. We know there's a gap between theoretical and practical. We're trying to reduce that gap. And the good approach about that is using it as a case where you are already in a position where you're more likely to be able to have a drop-in solution which is readily adoptable, but is a little bit more incremental.
And adaptable to today's modern manufacturing processes, I suppose.
That's a key bit, because we're talking multi-billion-dollar investments for gigafactories. So if you turn around and say, I've solved your problem of your energy density, but you have to redo all your tooling, they'll say no.
So, I mean, we're kind of running out of time today on this episode, but I did have one question about electric aircraft and how dense are batteries right now, and how dense do they need to be to make electric aircraft a reality, at least for kind of short-term flights, like I'm thinking from, say, the UK to Germany, that sort of distance?
That's a great question. I will put a bit of caveats of some of the bits with regards to aircraft requirements are a little bit out of my area. But what I do say is, with electric vehicles, essentially a lot of the targets were, we need 500 watt hours per kilogram. And that was kind of with a view that if they had cells of that type, they were expecting putting them together in a pack, I'll add loads of dead weight and I'll come to this sort of pack level. I need that. But the electric vehicles we've adopted today, with ranges that we see, over 400 miles in some cases, fast rates, long lifetimes beyond the warranty of what they originally thought, that's been achieved without realizing that goal because of other developments as a result, etc. That improvement component helped. Similarly, sometimes we see reports that the aerospace industry is saying we need something like 1,000 watt-hours per kilogram. And that means that's basically saying we need new chemistries.
Right.
What we also mean is what happens if now we're producing 500 watt-hour per kilogram cells, plus we got improvements in cell to pack. This is starting to open up. Well, we're already seeing that we got vast adoption with lighter aircraft and drone technology. And I kind of feel as it's important to do aspects which look into next generation chemistry choices, but you have to remember you have to build up that whole infrastructure and scale again. And also the component of your spec you required is probably making some assumptions which is not taking into account other things that are progressing it.
But based on the current specification, the aviation industry is basically saying we need double the energy density of today's kind of very best top
But I don't think
range.
they're looking at batteries necessarily anyway. Maybe for the very light aircraft and drones, but it's more fuel cell technology.
What are you talking about, hydrogen and things?
Yeah.
Well, they're actually looking at both, is my understanding. But I mean, there are electric aircraft, but they're kind of in the prototype stage and don't have very long ranges.
So it depends. Also, I think like electrification does change how people use that option, and it'd be interesting where in the future, up until say 10 years ago, the view was all our aircrafts are just getting bigger and bigger. But will it be interesting with, way in which technology is allowing us to talk more online and things like that, and people are more conscious of their carbon footprint? Will we be doing the same level of transport things as we did before? Will it be a case where we just have more ubiquitous lighter aircraft and drones doing things like bringing us takeout?
But nonetheless, going on from that point, and maybe we can make this the last question because I'm afraid we have run out of time a little bit today, is that Jack's point about aircraft there. Also in our current issue, we're going to be covering the rail network and shipping as well. Everyone's looking to decarbonize, and electrification is the way to go. And so maybe as a final point, although we've touched on it, do we have, irrespective, we probably don't have enough electricity for all of that at the moment. Do we have the engineering materials to make all these motors and batteries? Industry's trying to automate itself a lot more. That's more motors, more pumps, all requiring this, all competing for the same resources. We're just not in a position to be able to do that yet, are we?
Well, we need to retrain a workforce in this area. You mentioned, do we have enough materials for all of this? So supply chain increases and diversification is key. I think with the technologies, kind of, as you said, with areas, for a long time it was viewed that lithium-ion batteries would be used for, say, trucks. That's been the case. There's been a view that hydrogen would be used more for trains, but they've become more electrified. I think with large cargo ships, you're currently using diesel engines to park into the harbour. And if you could just electrify that stage, that would be huge. But then you touched upon the other point, which is how we distribute the power from, say, the wind turbines, which we need more of, solar cells, which we need more of, nuclear as well, which we probably need more of. In that case, it is a big daunting task how we put this all together. And lithium-ion batteries by themselves won't do everything. And you're right that there's other technologies that need to be done in tandem. I mean, the nice thing about working as an academic is you do work. I've worked on fuel cells as well as lithium batteries. It's like choosing my favorite child, and solar cells and transistors. So I think workforce training, education, and because that means that and people like myself, academics, scientists, researchers, should really be helping with communicating to the general public. So this is why podcasts like this are fantastic, because that helps with informed decisions with policymakers and the public. The public will vote and they will take decisions on, we need to have these technology improvements to help us. And that comes from education. With the future is brighter with some things, and these are options that we can do, but we need to be informed of what all the implications are. And so really thanks to you guys for sort of the communication aspect that helps with education.
Well, we thank you very much for being here today. It's much appreciated. We're going to leave it there for today's episode. So thank you very much for your expertise. If people would like to contact you, would it be right in saying you can just go through the University of Warwick website?
That's correct. So my email address and etc. is available on those websites, so it should be easy to find.
All right. And if you've enjoyed today's Off the Page podcast, there's many more on our website, also on our YouTube channel or wherever else you get your podcast from. So until the next time, thank you very much for listening and goodbye.